Welcome back to KOAN, 95.1 FM, 1080 AM, Hot Talk, the Joe Miller Show. We have an exciting segment lined up for you. Floyd Brown, he's a writer, editor of westernjournalism.com, a former executive director of the Reagan Ranch, my friend. I've known him for a number of years. He is a warrior, not just in the culture war, but in the halls of politics everywhere. Ubiquitous is a good word for Floyd Brown. Floyd, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, Joe. And let me just start by congratulating you on your new show here. It's exciting news, and I think you are uniquely qualified to share with your listening audience some really important insights, legal insights, but political insights too. So I'm excited for your new show, and I'm looking forward to listening to it.
Well, thank you for that vote of confidence. Of course, you're the cutting edge when it comes to political issues. We turn to westernjournalism.com a lot to get informed. I appreciate what you've made that site into. That's a top 50, maybe in top 20 site in the United States right now, as far as political sites go?
As far as political sites go, it's probably now in the top 10, but I think The last ranking, we're in the top 300 websites, period, of all websites in the United States. So we've definitely grown over the last few years.
Well, that's fantastic. You've got a good group of folk down there. I certainly appreciated the summit that you guys put on several weeks ago, getting the news out through blogging, through the alternative media of the Internet. From my perspective, it's the hope of freedom. I'm a little bit terrified, and I'm going to sandbag you a little bit on this issue because I didn't talk to you about it during the break, but what the president is doing with the Internet. It looks like he's trying yet again to grab control. We heard from the FCC chair, not the chair, but one of the two conservative members of the 5-member FCC, that the president is planning a takeover effectively. He's trying to do things that are going to impact bandwidth and content, and basically he's got 3 willing allies on the FCC. What have you heard about that?
Well, the truth is that the political elites in Washington, including Barack Obama, desperately hate the Internet. They hate it because it's where ideas freely flow. And they've controlled this country by controlling the major news outlets. They control ABC, NBC, CBS, even exert a lot of influence over Fox News. And so when the media elites are challenged by this new free-for-all that is new media, or what I like to call it social media news, it's a real challenge to their authority. And so they always turn to government to reestablish their authority. And it's not surprising the Obama administration has a series of proposals which would basically re-regulate the Internet and could have a very almost scary impact on freedom of data distribution. So the Internet has been lightly regulated to date, and they propose to completely change that, and it could upset the apple cart and change the ability of people to get true free news online.
So what can we do as far as influence? Is there anything, first of all, that Congress can do to trump the FCC and the majority that Obama holds there?
Well, first of all, this is not his first attempt. These new regulations actually come as a result of their old regulations being overturned in federal court. The legislation is pretty clear, and I think that basically they have to rename the Internet from an information source to a telecom service. And they have a lot of latitude to rename things regulatorily. I think it's pretty clear that the Internet is an information source, and so they're going to face another challenge in court, and Congress can always step in and limit federal regulators. I mean, one of my biggest disappointments in John Boehner is that he hasn't been more aggressive in limiting outlandish regulatory policies of the Obama administration.
It's interesting. We had a guest on yesterday that suggested that although the fight on the speaker was lost, at least it appeared to be lost, that effectively Boehner's been neutered by that fight. What have you heard about that? Is he lining up now, or is he still kind of running the establishment show?
Well, I think that it's naive to think that John Boehner's not running the establishment's show. John Boehner, from day one in his career, has done everything he can to cozy up to the permanent ruling elite in Washington. And I think that's part of the problem that the Republicans have in Congress, is that both of the leaders in the Senate and the House are really from the old Washington, the pre-Tea Party Washington, that is much more interested in, controlling government and using government from a Republican perspective rather than actually physically rolling back government. And that's the fight right now as I see it. There are those of us who believe, and by the way, we're both on the left and the right, people that believe that government is too big, controls too much, and they really relish and want their freedom. And then there's those that love government. I mean, Stan Evans said it best. Stan, who was one of the original pundits of the conservative movement, he said, before we came to Washington, we saw that place as a cesspool. But once we got there, we realized it was a hot tub. And and you've had generation after generation of people going to Washington, like Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and they've really had great motives. But when they get there, they settle into this hot tub and they realize, wow, this is great. And the next thing they know, they're being chauffeured around in a limousine, and they've got, security details, and they're eating free at every buffet they walk by, and people are showing up at their offices, giving them gifts, and it's a great lifestyle. And so it becomes a way of life. And so their modus operandi is protecting that lifestyle as opposed to governing the country with maximum efficiency.
And they're almost zombie-like in their obedience to the establishment's agenda. It amazes me watching Boehner, who, will go out there and trumpet that he's one of the most conservative voters in the Congress. But then every time there's a real fight, what does he do? He runs for cover. He does what, basically the establishment wants. It's also interesting to me that although you're right, a lot of these folk predated the Tea Party. When they ran for re-election this last cycle, of course, all the members of the House did, a third of the Senate. Virtually all the Republicans ran on a Tea Party agenda, right?
Yeah, but don't get campaigns confused with governance. Really, the truth is that both parties, both left and right, Democrats, Republicans, they give one message to the voters that they know the voters want to hear, and then they go to Washington and do what they darn well please. And the two rarely meet, and most of the time they spend their time in Washington chuckling about how naive the voters are because they actually believed the crock of baloney that was fed to them during the course of the campaign.
Well, one of the areas where voters, even on the left, and this is pretty much a broad-based view, are against the open borders policy, the open immigration policy that seems to be advocated by members of leadership on both sides of the aisle. What have you heard about the Syrian immigration that's going on? And we just have, I think, about 3.5 minutes left in this segment.
Well, there's, the immigration crisis is one thing, and we could burn 3 minutes talking about that. But let's just focus in particular on one little section of immigration, and that is that the United States has for decades been a place where people could come as refugees, and particularly refugees from war-torn parts of the world. I mean, that's why when you go to Orange County, California, you'll see 100,000 Vietnamese. It's because when the boat people fled Vietnam and oppression of communism, we opened our hearts and we opened our country, and they were welcome. And so many different stories of where we've welcomed refugees. The problem that we have right now is that when we welcome Islamic refugees, Islam is not just a religion, and people have to understand this. Islam governs much more than just a person's spiritual life as you have in Christianity. Jesus was clear. He said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God. And so as a result, you have kind of this dichotomy between church and state, which does not exist under Islam. Islam is a political system as well as a religious system. So when people come here and they're Islamic, they come with a belief that is a religious belief that our way of life and our system of governance is wrong. And they believe that everyone should be governed by Sharia. And so if we let in 100,000, 200,000, 1 million Syrian refugees, we're going to not only be letting in people that are diametrically opposed to America's way of life, but also a certain percentage of those, 2, 3, 4, 5%, could be jihadis themselves, using this as a way to sneak into the country so that they can cause the kind of havoc that the Islamic immigrants caused from Saudi Arabia on 9/11.
Right. And, I think that's a very conservative percentage. One of the international polling groups polled Arab Muslim countries, determined that something like a quarter or more of all Muslims identify with radical jihadist principles. And, that's just a huge number when you consider that marginal groups throughout history have been a much smaller percentage than that. That is enormous as far as a percentage of Islam goes.
But that's the foundational beliefs that were given to them by Muhammad. So you have to realize this is a political system. Muhammad was a conqueror, and he was creating a political system that governed and ruled. And so it's not just a system of governing your spiritual life. It's a system of governing all areas of your life.
Stephen Crowder interviewed a famous imam who's a lawyer here in the United States who said he did not believe in the First Amendment. Incompatibility between radical Islam and the American system. We'll talk about President Clinton. You've got a history with him as far as whether or not he might be a liability to Hillary. Stick with us, The Joe Miller Show. Welcome back to KOAN 1080 AM 95.1 FM Hot Talk, The Joe Miller Show. If you want to talk to our guest, talk to me, give us a piece of your mind, 569-1080. If you're streaming nationwide, 907-569-1080. Still have with us Floyd Brown, the editor of westernjournalism.com, a top 10 political site in the nation, writer, author. And Floyd, we were talking about one of your earliest books, Slick Willy, Why America Cannot Trust Bill Clinton. You wrote that in 92 before the presidential election, and it was prophetic.
Yeah, I like to call it the book that spawned a genre, which it was really the first, what would we call it, anti-Clinton book. But I think, we just tried to tell a story of the Bill Clinton in Arkansas. And the news media, just like with Obama, did not want to cover Bill Clinton in his totality. They wanted to give you just this, candy picture of him, which really distorted the facts. And we tried to dig beyond that, and it was a pretty successful book, and I'm very proud of it and the things that are in it to this very day. So,
well, you actually interviewed Jennifer Flowers as part of that work, right?
Yeah, we were very early on the entire genre of what they called bimbo eruptions, but Jennifer Flowers was one of many women because Bill Clinton is a serial philanderer. He is a man that cannot control his zipper. He loves sex with women. And whether he was governor of Arkansas, whether he was president of the United States, and now after being president, he is a man who has a voracious appetite for different women. And
it seems like a lot of elites have that. And, of course, now it appears that Clinton may have had a voracious appetite for girls as well.
Yeah, well, you're referring to the many flights he took on the billionaire's plane, I'm assuming. And,
right, that's Epstein, and it's called the Lolita Express.
Yeah, the Lolita Express. Well, I'm not an expert on it. From what I understand, Joe, what you have is a situation where this billionaire was basically procuring girls for the political elite. And it included a number of people from around the globe, but Bill Clinton was one of many who feasted at the table of young girls with this billionaire.
So what you learned back in the early 90s, it doesn't surprise you to see where Clinton's at today.
Oh, no. I mean, this is something I said way back in the 90s is men with that type of appetite for women rarely change. I mean, we've all known the cad. We've all known the philanderer. And generally, they go to their grave as a philanderer. And it's not surprising at all that he's continuing to act true to past experience. And it's very sad that the mainstream media continues to look past it. And we've known for a long time that the marriage with Hillary Clinton is just one of sheer convenience and political expediency. So she uses it to help herself. He uses it to help himself, and it's not a real marriage in the sense that this is a loving couple that care for each other. And I think it's pretty evident from the record of the way they both acted.
Well, it's interesting that this topic of whether or not Clinton's misbehavior, and let's not call it misbehavior, that is that's a euphemism, alleged criminal acts with young girls, that it may actually be an anchor around Hillary Clinton's campaign. Apparently, bundlers are not getting behind her as was expected. There's only one or two Obama bundlers that have done anything for Hillary, despite the fact that Obama had said that his people would be there for her. A lot of people believe it's because of this liability that's been created potentially out of this misbehavior with Epstein. Judge Jeanine on Fox News last night was referring to this whole catastrophe that's arisen from the Epstein scandal. She said basically it involves the masters of the universe. So there is some coverage that's starting to come out now about this, and of course the connect that's forcing the media to address this, and again, it's just Fox that I've heard this on, is the fact that Hillary intends to run. And how could you be the wife of somebody that's engaged in this kind of behavior and be ignorant of it? She has to know.
Oh, yeah, she's always known. I mean, she was during the original campaign way back in 1992. She actually oversaw the office that dealt with bimbo eruption. So this is something that she's well aware of, and the record's pretty clear. I mean, remember, she called it the right-wing conspiracy talk, but it was never right-wing conspiracy talk. Yeah, I'm a conservative. Yeah, a lot of the people that were willing to have the courage to report and talk about this stuff may be conservative, but it wasn't a conspiracy because it's true.
Yeah, it's conspiracy fact.
Yeah, it's not. A conspiracy theory is something that's conjecture and everything. I challenge anyone, and I've done this repeatedly on the media. I challenge you to find something in my book, Slick Willy, that's not documented and true.
So, it's not just Clinton, though. I mean, did you hear this or see this video clip that came out yesterday with Vice President Joe Biden groping the Secretary of Defense's wife?
Well, I mean, there's no one holding these people accountable. So, yeah, no, I did see it. I mean, she wasn't happy with it. This is the way these elites in Washington act.
And they act with impunity. I mean, the media does not keep them accountable at all. I mean, you've got to go to these sites on and of course, videos don't lie, right?
And this goes way, 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 way back. I mean, I remember when I first came to Washington, and all the talk was about Ted Kennedy, who actually had sex with a woman on a table in a well-known restaurant. So these people have been acting like this for decades. And a lot of times the media go to these parties that are practically open orgies, and so they're not going to broadcast it because they're implicated in it.
Well, now with the new media, the internet, it's kind of hard to hide, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's why I love the new media, and that's why I have buried my own efforts into the new media, is because it's a place where the truth can stand on its own and people can get the full disclosure and full truth. This other reason why I like talk radio, and I'm glad that you're going to be now on the air every day sharing important things that people just won't get from the mainstream media.
Well, it's important that people listen to alternative means of information. When you look at what we're faced with as a country, changing demographics, the youth that don't seem to identify in many respects with foundational constitutional freedoms, as Stephen Crowder was telling us earlier on the show on a past segment. And that the fact of it is there are lots of things that we're going to have to overcome to get the country back on track. But one of the keys is making sure that people have access to the facts, to information, what's going on in government, so that they can act with that information, vote accordingly, and put the pressure where pressure needs to lie.
Right. That's one of the reasons why we let people comment on our site. You know what? If you don't like the news as we're presenting it at westernjournalism.com, you can comment on it yourself.
So tell us a little bit more about where you think we're headed presidentially. I mean, you've got Hillary Clinton that has indicated she's throwing her hat in the ring. Scott Walker's making noise. Of course, Jeb Bush wants to become King Bush III. Yeah. I've heard that our friend Governor Huckabee is thinking about running. How do you think this is going to shape up?
And actually, there's a couple of new polls out, a new CNN poll, I don't know if you've seen it, that actually show him as in the lead with 13%. Shows Bush fading and Huckabee actually gaining speed. And one of the reasons is because Mike Huckabee has always been everybody's number two. And I think as the race gets more defined, you're going to see that he becomes the favorite of more people rather than just the number two favorite of a lot of people.
So why do you think that's the case? What are his strengths?
Well, I think his strength, first of all, is executive experience. The truth is that we've had an inexperienced senator as chief executive, and it didn't work. It doesn't even matter what the extent of your executive experience is. If you have executive experience, the buck stops with you. You know how to deal with a legislature. He has all of that experience. Secondly, he, in my mind, is probably the single best communicator inside the Republican Party. Often when I'm listening to Mike Huckabee, I think of Ronald Reagan, and I worked for Ronald Reagan, so he was somebody I knew personally. And Mike is an excellent communicator. Is he a perfect candidate? No, probably if he was 30 pounds lighter and had a full head of hair, he'd be a better candidate. But he's pretty darn good as he is.
Well, he's a man of the people. I mean, even though he may have made some mistakes from some conservatives' perspective, as the governor of Arkansas, a lot of people don't understand the circumstances of that. When he governed in Arkansas, both sides of the legislature in Arkansas were controlled by the Democrats, and yet he was still able to accomplish some conservative points of his agenda despite that.
I've never, as a conservative, believed that we were going to find anybody that's perfection. And those conservatives that are out there looking for perfection, they're only going to find it after the Lord Jesus Christ returns. And in fact, when I look for perfection, the only one that's ever achieved that is Jesus Christ himself. So I expect that you're going to have politicians that made mistakes. Ronald Reagan made a lot of mistakes as governor of California. He admitted them. And but he was still an outstanding president. So, I don't have a lot of patience for people that want perfection. They're never going to find it, and they tend to just be disgruntled people anyway.
Right. Well, I appreciate your insights, Floyd. I'm sure that we'll have you back on another program. You've got your finger on the pulse. You've got all sorts of insight as to what's going on inside the Beltway, but you managed to stay outside of it so that you get the real deal perspective. Appreciate what westernjournalism.com is doing. I encourage all my listeners to go there and check out the national news items of interest. Thank you, Floyd, for being with us. Appreciate it.
Bye.